Thank you very much. I think this is the third time, yeah? This is my third time. The first time invitation is pretty easy to get. The second one's a miracle. The third one is absolutely out of this world to get. So thank you for that. I don't know if it's because I've done anything special. I think it's just you've forgotten that I've been 3 times. I don't know. Oh, I'll get those later. Thanks, Irene. Stuart and Irene, they are wonderful people who I've known now, I guess it would be Nellie, going on 20 years. The problem is it is very infrequent visits we have, as you said, once a year. But I'm watching from afar. I watch you on Twitter. I actually retweet some of your tweets, the good ones. So about every 6 months you get a retweet from me. No, I'm kidding. That's not fair to say. I wish we had more time together, but you live a very big world, and I have a very busy one. Those are 2 different things. But I really appreciate you allowing me to come into your world. It's a real honor, actually. I don't treat it lightly. I know that you have resources in this room alone that could do all the stuff you want to do. I've seen them, heard them already this morning, many of them already. But just to come and work with you guys is a real honor, so thank you for that. So we have an afternoon today, and then we do another day with Alive tomorrow, and the team and Howard and all the guys and whoever they are. Just been with Paul. Paul wasn't there, but these guys were there, so we had a team day with them, and then on Thursday somewhere else, and then I go home, and then back again on Monday. But that's the way it goes. Are you all good? Are you happy? Great. I bet you're just looking forward to lunch, aren't you? I've had lunch here before. Already seen the bread rolls, nice and soft. Make great hamburgers, those bread rolls. But before we get there, we're going to have some food for the spirit, I hope. Is that cool? I'd like to share just quickly some things that I think are quite phenomenal that you're seeing in the world today. Because at the moment in the world today, there's a lot of, you could say once upon a time the world was very ambiguity. There was a lot of ambiguity. You didn't know. Now it's very black and white, isn't it? It's sort of like you've got this side and that side. You've got news about the church, which is good, and you've got some news about the church, which is not so good, and the data's coming out and all that. But the good news, which we want to talk about, is what's happening around the globe with churches like ours, which is just phenomenal at the moment. Never seen anything like these days, because I, like you, was probably saved in the 70s, maybe not all of you, but you weren't born, some of you then, but in the 70s, and it was all about the last days, and Jesus was coming back. And I suppose you could feel that more than ever today, but we were told it would be in the 80s. Jesus would come back in maybe 84, maybe 91, around that time, but we'd never make the year 2000. And then when the glitch in the computers came in the year 2000, see, this is the end of it. Well, that never happened. I remember going to a Danish pastor's house who actually hoarded water and food and everything else, and for that 2000 glitch in the computers. What was that called? Millennial bug, that's right. And I said, "You're crazy. What are you doing that for?" "Oh, there'll be no food or water, if this happens." And I said, "Well, it's probably not going to happen." And he said, "Well, what are you going to do if it does happen?" I said, "I'm coming to your place because you've got all the food and you're a Christian, so you have to give me some of what you've got." That never happened, and now we're heading for 2018, and the world is still going on. But it looks to me like Jesus is getting closer to returning too at the same time, doesn't it? So we have this very clear things that are happening in the world. And one of the things I think that is so exciting to see at the moment, what he's doing in parts of the world you wouldn't normally think would start to grow and see live churches. So around about 30 years ago, I had opportunity to work with the Japanese AOG. And the Japanese AOG was probably the largest Pentecostal church in Japan. I think Japan now is heading towards 100 million people. And it's a small island, it's very densely populated. Some of you have probably been there. And the AOG was very small. I think the largest church at the time was around 70 people. And they were all on average about 20 to 30. So the AOG has not done much and has not grown since that time. They're pretty much the same size. They were given land or bought land just after the war, downtown Tokyo. I think it's 5 acres, which is worth today $1 billion US. They have 3 students in that complex worth $1 billion US. They could pay off the national debt of some small countries around the globe with that. So about 14 years ago, an Australian guy went over to Japan to plant a church. He doesn't speak Japanese. He doesn't have any Japanese links. He just decided it would be a good idea to go to Japan 14 years ago. Today he has 18 campuses with 4,800 people attending this church. It's the biggest thing Japan has ever seen. So I went and had a look to see what was going on here, because Japanese people have no idea of Christmas or Easter or what they mean. We're celebrating all this now, and our big moment, isn't it? It's somebody's talking about Merry Christmas and putting Christ back into the Mass, or the mess. And we're excited by that. Japanese people never heard it. They don't know who Jesus is or what he means. So you go to a place like that and you see a church that on Sunday is no different to your church in terms of what they sing and what they do, but thousands of Japanese people meeting Jesus. I saw them. I met them. They are raw Christians. They have no understanding of the faith. They have to start from the scratch with every single one and build them up. This guy's rent in Tokyo per week is 50,000 American dollars per week for a building that he uses four or five services on. And all of that is funded by local Japanese people who've been saved, baptized, filled with the Spirit, and now tithe into the life of that church. I think that is staggering. Recently, I said, what's your hardest period been? He's been through some tough times, as you do apostolic work like that. And he said, the toughest time I had was about 2.5 years ago. We lost about 650 people over a period of a year. That's a lot of people. Had a major leadership, which is quite interesting, because around the 10-year mark of new churches, that's often what happens. And he had this massive dilemma go on, and he recovered from that in the space of 2.5 years, and is now growing faster than he did before. But remember, not from transient moving Christians with nowhere to go. These are raw converts. How do you recover from that? I'm like, how do you do that? We rely on maybe if somebody does church planting in our part of the world, Europe, they tend to but there tends to be an automatic flow in from Christians who are unhappy with where they've been or want to look for something else, don't they? And they start the church on that and then build up and then start maybe winning the lost. This guy has just winning them every single day. Absolutely staggering. For me, that was the biggest highlight of this year, to see a guy in a place that is totally unchurched, winning people for Jesus every single day. And there's a lot more I could say about how he does that and what he does, but that's for another time. But I think that sort of is good news. And I'm very excited about what we see in Europe. I talked to you, I think I might have mentioned to you guys at least, watch Germany. 2 years ago, I said clearly Germany is the next European country to go. About 18 months ago, 2 new churches were planted, one in Cologne and one just out of Berlin. Well over 800 people in each church now, after a matter of 18 months. This is amazing, unheard of. Young men and women training for ministry with real hearts to serve God. I meet them everywhere I go, who are ready to plant churches, take over churches. Germany is a fascinating place to go right now and watch what God is doing around there. And same in the UK. We've got highlights here too, haven't we? Talking about ground level network and what you're doing here. I love those inputs we had from the different ways you're strategically identifying needs in local church and community to address the goal of winning more people to Christ. I think that's staggering stuff. So it's good news, alongside of a whole lot of bad stuff too. But let's make sure we look at the good stuff, not the fake news on Christian church, but the true news of what God is doing in his church is just phenomenal. Now, I don't know where you are at in terms of your particular moment in church life. That's for a personal conversation. But wherever you are, you need to know that Jesus is building his church. There's no question about it. And you can go anywhere now on the globe and find some city or some place where Jesus is. I was just in Mexico at Culiacan, which is the drug capital of Mexico. You do not touch anything in that country with your bag, because it's bound to have some drugs on it. And when you go out the airport, you'll be taken aside and interviewed, because there's drugs. It's in the air. It's a nice place to visit. Very happy. You just breathe it in. The hotel I stayed in, the chief of police lived in the top, and the mafia who ran the drug cartels were in the hotel liaisoning with this guy. And you could see who they were. You didn't look at them face to face. You kept away from them. You had your breakfast quietly and sort of left them alone. In that place there's a massive church just starting 4 new campuses. I said to the pastor, what's your major pastoral concern right now? He said, well, we have a great member in our church who's got a young son who got caught up with a group of boys, 3 other boys, and they went and robbed the house. The problem is they robbed the wrong house. It was a mafia cartel boss, and the mafia cartel boss has already slaughtered the 3 other boys and is now hunting down the son of this man, and I'm trying to work them through this thing, this pastoral moment. I'm like, wow, that puts a whole new look on pastoral care in our world. The drug cartel is going to kill one of your members' sons for robbing their house. And so he's hidden away somewhere, but they say they'll probably find this kid, and it's just stuff. But the church is booming. And let's keep our eyes centered on the fact that Jesus is building his church. All right, today what I want to do is, I don't know if this is going to help you guys, but this is what I want to talk to you about. I want to talk to you about, what I think are 3 misunderstood verses in the Bible and how they affect leadership. So what I'll do is I'm going to unpack that. Now, I'll put this caveat on this. 3 misunderstood verses. I'll put a caveat, in my opinion. And I do that for a reason, because when you put my opinion next to it, there's no argument anymore, and then you come up and say, oh, well, it's just an opinion. But if you say categorically then you're in trouble. So in my opinion, that's very millennial, isn't it? In my opinion, I have one, and I'm allowed to say it wherever I like, on social media at any time. So in my opinion, I've got 3 of these ideas, and what I want to do then is give you 4 little jogger notes of how hopefully, if we get that verse right, maybe it can help you unpack leadership in your situation where you are. The first one is found in John 13:8 and 9, and it says this: "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me." Peter then replied, "Then wash all of me." Now, let's give the background of this verse. This is the verse that's used, and it's repeated in other places, that we call the servant leadership model. It's the one where they've been out for the day, traveling around, they get to the house, and the typical thing was, as you know, they took off the sandals and the dust on the feet, and a servant or somebody would come and wash the feet of the people to prepare them for eating and dining and doing what they had to do in the house. So Jesus gets down, doesn't he? And he starts to wash the feet of the disciples, and Peter reacts to this because this is not really his role, and he doesn't understand it. And then Jesus says to him these interesting, unless I do this, I can not cleanse you at all. So Peter, he sort of gets this, and he says, then wash all of me. Now, what is that background there? The problem we have with that verse sometimes, if we don't get it right, is the servant leadership model, which actually was inspired by a man called Robert Greenleaf, who took this idea about 1950s. He worked for AT&T, a very large communications, which still exists today in America. And he was in charge of customer relations. So Robert Greenleaf, who was a Quaker by religious experience, therefore Christianized to some degree, or had Christian background, he started reading the ideas of Jesus and then replicating those into organizational behavior. And he said, well, maybe what we can start to talk about is how would Jesus operate a monopoly, a corporate event like this? And he talked about servant leadership. He talked about things like the customer comes first, customer care. He wrote a lot of articles, very academic man. He was more of an academic than a practitioner. And he influenced AT&T, which then spread in the 60s and 70s to the modern marketing idea of the customer is always right, the customer is first, we serve them, we turn the hierarchical chart up, and we serve from the bottom and so forth. Today, you can study at the Greenleaf University in America on servant leadership, just that alone. But that's flawed, actually, in the context of what he's writing here. It's not really quite right. Now, Jesus did go on to say in this verse, you know, that I want you to learn from this experience, that it's a good thing as a leader, you learn to serve. But the context was not that. If you read the Gospels, the context is very clear. It's all about ritual cleansing. The context of Paul's writings were usually about Gnostics, but in terms of Jesus, or the Gospels at least, it was ritual cleansing. Now, this was the big Jewish phenomena, wasn't it? If you go to, many of you have been to Israel, you can see these mikvahs where the high priest would go into the mikvah, or the washing thing, and they'd have 8 or 9 in their home, dirty, filthy water. Had been there 8 or 9 months. But the symbol of going down into the water, on the steps, right down underneath, almost like baptism, which we understand baptism, which is where it comes from for us today. Then they would come out of the water. They could never go back up the steps they came down on. Then you were unclean again. Strict laws on this. Hebrews talks about the washing of the water of the hands, the baptism of the hands. Strict laws on ritual cleansing. Jesus is bumping into this wherever he goes. You read stuff like... You have rivers of living water. All of it is around this idea of ritual cleansing. You read the idea of, for example, the story of the Samaritan, where the two priests are walking down the road and they see the man beaten up. And we often talk about religious people who don't care for the poor. Is not the context. It's ritual cleansing. If they touch that man, they'd have to go home and spend maybe half a day cleansing themselves all over again to go and do what they were wanting to do. The man who was blind, and Jesus put mud, or made mud and put it on his eyes. He'd go to the pool of Siloam and wash. The pool of Siloam wasn't a little pool like a swimming pool. It was a massive ritual cleansing bathing place where you'd walk down the stairs, go under the water. He'd probably washed his eyes as he's under the water, and then come up the other side, cleansed, ritually cleansed. So what Jesus is doing here is he's talking about ritual cleansing to them. He's pointing to the cross. And that's why Peter suddenly got it. He suddenly understands, oh, I need to be totally cleansed then. All Jesus is doing, what Jesus is doing is all the time is pointing them always to the cross. Remember when he talked about the woman who came and anointed him with oil just before he went on the cross, and he said she understands more about what's to happen than any of you do. And all of that was pointing to the cross. And it wasn't servant leadership in that way. What we've done with servant leadership, we've gone to a mode of servant leadership where we come down into stuff. We go down into things that we should never get into. We come down into things that have none of our interest at all, because we believe we must be like Jesus. We should carry the keys of the church with us wherever we go, so that if anybody needs us, we're available 24 hours a day to do what they want them to do at any time, because we're servants first. But it's wrong. It's not the context. Actually, building the church by going down is the wrong way to build a church. We build the church by going up. You see, the great way to build church is to move up a level, not go down into things. The more you go down into things, the more you mess up what's actually happening. The more you create gap, the better off people are around you who can flourish and move into the gap. Then I ask the question of this, then what is the greatest servant leadership model of Jesus? And it has to be the resurrection. The resurrection is where Jesus served us, in true terms of servant leadership by definition. What he did is he created a gap between the disciples and himself. He said, I now will go to the Father. I'll be on the right-hand side of the Father. I will pray for you, remember? I will pray for you. Now there's a gap. So the disciples have to do one or the other thing. They either have to rise up or run away. They chose to run away. What happens is Jesus comes, or he says, in 50 days you'll be empowered, and that's a key word, to do what I've called you to do. So his presence physically in the moment would have limited the statement he said, greater things than I've done you shall do. That's a numeric thing, not a quality thing. Raising 7 people from the dead is the best you can do. So that's a quantity statement. He's saying, if I'm out of the way, then all of you can do more of what I did. But if I'm in the way, you can't do it. The greatest servant leadership role you have is to get out of the way and create gap, than think you have to get down and wash disciples' feet. Feet. They're not 3 legs. Feet. Now, the question is, you're saying, that's maybe rather interesting. Can you sort of prove that that's actually what it means? Yes, I can. I'll show you in a passage in the scripture where the disciples actually got this idea. Acts chapter 6. Acts chapter 6, as you know, is where the Hellenists, the widows were. Now, remember, the church is in a moment of momentum in the book of Acts. Actually, if you read the book of Acts as the story of momentum, which is a great thing to do, just sit down and read it in one go as a story of momentum. What you'll discover is momentum was not problematic. It was the roadblocks to momentum that was problematic. And it's dealing with roadblocks of momentum. Now, momentum's not speed. Speed is when you're just spinning your wheels or moving at 100 mile an hour is speed. But that doesn't mean much. Momentum is much better. That means you've got traction, you're moving forward, you're taking ground. Some churches are spinning wheels with lots of dust and noise and smoke, but there's no movement. We want momentum. So what we need to do is get rid of the roadblocks to momentum. All right? Here's the first one, the Hellenists, a detail. The widows are not getting any food. What do the disciples say? If they were true servant leaderships, they would have said, heck, we've been busy with stuff. We'll come down and do the detail. But they remembered the resurrection moment, not the sandal wash, the feet washing moment. And this is what they said in Acts chapter 6, verse 2. It would not be right for us to neglect the ministry and the word of prayer, which is what Jesus was doing right then, to wait on tables. Now, in our world today, that's arrogant, that's bad leadership, that's all up the wrong way, but actually they caught the moment. They got the idea of gap. So they said, structurally now, you need, and here's where it empowers people, find some people who can do this, that are of this quality, and we will separate them to do it, but we're not coming down into that stuff. The biggest mistake of leadership is to think servant leadership is getting down into the detail, and it's not. It's actually doing the opposite and creating gap. Does that make sense? I think the problem of church life on many occasions, when I go around churches, is asking myself the question, if we took the senior minister or whoever's in governance at a certain level out of the picture, what would happen here? So one of the things I've worked hard for a couple of reasons on, which is not common in Europe, and I mean, you're Brexit now, so you're not, when I say Europe, I mean Europe. Before, it used to include you, it doesn't anymore. You're just something over here. You're an island, really, just nothingness here. But there's Europe over there. In Europe, sorry, I had to do that. I'm very un-PC. I'm sort of like the Donald Trump of the Pentecostal movement. Anyway, better hair, but un-PC. As you know, Stuart, I am, aren't I? But I'm behaving myself today. Well, I'm in the UK. You're not in Europe anymore. Anyway, in Europe, which we have in Australia and America and other places, maybe here, is this thing called the sabbatical after 10 years, or you go away for 3 months, and the pastor has time off. There's a number of reasons for this, is they've worked hard, they've done this, they've done that, usually low salary, or lower salary they should be earning. So we honour that role by 3 years paid salary, you go away. Now, when I've managed, and I've done dozens of these, very rare for a European to do this, but they love it. And when you manage these, they're quite interesting because, of course, the pastors think that when they go away, and they go away for 3 months, when they go away, they still have contact. They have the mobile phone and the email to make contact. Well, of course, what we do is we close all that down. They have to get a new number, and the email's cut off. So they have absolutely zero contact for 3 months. Why do we do that? Well, firstly, it's important for them to take their sabbatical in the right way because they're so used to getting into detail. So you take them out of the detail for once and see what happens. The second thing is they just think they're control freaks. Pastors are control freaks. They really are. Yep, that was like a lead balloon too, but it's a fact. We have this thing about controlling, and if we're not got our fingers on the pie, something's not going to work. So we do this and we send them away. Now, I remember one pastor, a Swedish guy, he'd gone about 2 weeks, and I got a call from the leaders in the church, and they said, we don't know what to do because they are calling us texting us almost every day. They were in America, texting us every day with things to do. I had to ring that pastor and say, this is what's going to happen. If you do not desist with doing this, we will bring you home tomorrow and you can start work again. If you're going to continue working on a paid sabbatical, then you might as well be back here doing it because we're not paying for you to be away to do that. So please throw your phone in the swimming pool and stop it. And they did. They went for 3 months. Now here's what you do when they come back. You sit down with the team and you evaluate what do they not have to do anymore that they were doing before they left. That list is long. Because suddenly what happens as soon as you create this gap, these people rise up. What's interesting about gaps is who rises up and how they behave. So we've used the sabbatical model to find out what happens in a church when actually the pastor just disappears for 3 months. Let's see what, now let me say this, it's well planned. We make sure every service is covered. There's usually a manual that goes with this so everyone knows what's happening on the days that they're away, not just left. It's well planned. But the idea is gap creation. Does that make sense? See, I believe servant leadership is the ability to create gaps, not go and do things for other people. And I think we've misused that verse the wrong way, since it's about ritual cleansing and not servant leadership. So let me give you 4 things that I think we need to learn to do now that we maybe, in my opinion, understand that verse a bit better. I've been asked lots of times to do messages on servant leadership. And I'm saying, well, what part of this do you want? Do you want the classical sort of view, Christian view of servant leadership, which does not grow a church? Or do you want to come out of the box of thinking you have and do something completely different, which is my first point. Manage your mentality. See, the thing of leadership is often we talk about the heart of a leader, how important heart is. I agree, heart is important. Is it coming up there? Oh, you can push that button and it should come up there. No? Okay. There it is. I've got them all listed so you can just take pictures of the screen when you're finished. That's the quick way of doing this without notes. If you've still got pen and paper, that's okay. And manage mentality. See, I think leadership is more about mental stuff than it is just heart stuff. The heart stuff is character, courage, the things of life, and they're important. They're the foundational stuff. They're Christian leadership 101. But actually, a lot of leadership is the way we think. Actually, could we be frank here? Wouldn't that be true of any Christian? Christian behavior is about how we think more than about how we feel. By the way, if we start going to that trend of how we feel, we're in trouble already. Since that is the way the world is moving now, to the point of distraction, where feelings are now more important than fact. In fact, a feeling is a fact. Recently, I read an article, I'd read it now, but came out of Washington educational system in America, where the new standards of education have just been launched in 2018. And they're saying something like this in maths, for example. If you have a train leaving Boston at 30 mile an hour and one leaving Philadelphia at 40 mile an hour, when do they connect or when do they intersect? Well, that's a mathematical equation, is it not? But they are saying now to the younger generation, the 5, 6, 7-year-olds, if they write an answer like this, I don't like trains, I'm frightened of them, or Philadelphia is not a very nice place, or I don't like Boston, I went there once, that is equally as true as the correct mathematical answer. We are finished, ladies and gentlemen, because we don't lead like that. We don't lead out of feeling. Intuition, yes, absolutely. Sensing through the Holy Spirit, totally there. Emotion, responses to people's things and how they feel, never. Hello? But the next generation coming through will tell us, if I don't like what you're doing, that's more important to me than the data you're giving me right now, because the data, I don't care. That's truth to me. See, we have to make sure we get our mind right here and that we are willing to make the shift mentally to what is right to do rather than just stay with what we feel comfortable. A lot of the questions I ask as Stuart was talking before about some things I do, they'll make a decision in leadership and I'll say, let's pause on that decision. And I want to ask you to philosophically now, mentally, calculate what that means in 30 years in your church. That's hardly done by leaders. But you can make a quick decision here that in 10 years has terrible ramifications, but a 10-minute great result. See, that's a mental issue. So we have to make sure we get our minds right, which is why the New Testament focuses mainly on having the right way of thinking rather than having a heart only. The second one is create gaps, don't just add boxes. See, the traditional model, I think, in my opinion, of church, this is what I feel, of church life, is that we tend to look at a hierarchy and we'll add some boxes down the bottom or move the organizational boxes around. So, we need another department, let's add another box down there. And the top pile, the top bit, the top box, maybe eldership or senior minister, whatever structure you have, that never changes. That one just sits there all the time, adding boxes below. But actually what that box should be doing is moving up and out, so the boxes below go, what's that? I need to move up and in. So don't create more boxes, just create gaps. Another way of thinking about leadership, I think, when it comes to the next generation too. Here's the next one. Find your one thing. Find your one thing. Talking about campuses yesterday, and I liked some of the input we had, and they just said, well, our campuses are about this, and it's one thing. I can see your documents. When I look around, you've got very clear, specific one things that you do here. There's your vision for ground level and the things we do in one conference and leaders conference. I love that because it brings clarity to what's going on. You've got a book up the back I see called Essentialism, which I'd encourage you to buy after you've bought mine. And that's a great book on the power of focus and doing the one thing. If you can figure out your one thing, if you can get your one thing right as a leader and don't mess it up with all the other trivia that comes on, you'll be a much better leader for the people around you. Because the potential of people is found in when you let go and they rise up. Now you're going to say to me, well, hold on, what about trust issues and skill issues? Let me do that now. Don't delegate, but empower. There's a difference between delegation and empowerment. You know this. Delegation is do it, report back to me, and I'll tell you what you did if it was okay. Empowerment is you have the authority to carry out and make this thing happen and cause it to flourish, which is what happened on the day of Pentecost. They were empowered. So here's, I think, 4 things that are important in empowerment. You've got to have these down. The first one is that's it, thank you. The first one is skill, teachability, availability, and relationship. So if I delegate something to somebody, I don't really care too much about that as long as it gets done. If I empower, I need to understand by the task that's set, do they have the skill set to make that task happen? One of the things I think we're shifting to in church, which I think is a healthy thing, is instead of finding people who are willing to come on staff or be volunteers, we're setting the task out and asking who can do this job. Because in the past, we tended to just hire willing people, and the poor people were stressed and sometimes couldn't manage. They leave the church in a bad. Why? Because they weren't gifted to do that task. Once you know what they have to do, then you find the skill to do it. Now, some tasks in the church don't require the purest of all heart. For example, somebody doing a little bit of maybe a certain skill in the area of, say, design, which we often farm out to non-Christians anyway. Does it matter if their heart is not completely pure? But if they're emceeing a service, we want pure heart. So you've got to measure heart and skill. They're not the same in every situation you empower in. But do they have the skill to do it? If I want a brochure made up and I set out what I need to be done, I hunt that person down and I find who can do this well, instead of, I'm willing to make the brochure, but when you get the brochure, it's rubbish. But they were very willing. We used to say that, didn't we? They sing on like cats on a hot tin roof, but at least they're willing. And they hold their microphones out here, and they don't really engage, but they're willing. Not anymore, thank you. It is good that you're willing, but we need a little more. Can you sing is a good one. Because today, most millennials think they can sing, don't they? They all think they can sing. That's why they enter these contests, thousands upon thousands of them. And poor Cal has to say, you're rubbish. I'm with them all the way. They just think they can sing. Don't put them on there. Put somebody who can sing. Anyway, I won't go there further. But there's the next one in empowerment is teachability. When I ask them to change or move or look at something, are they teachable to do this? Are they understanding this as a teaching moment, or do they resist me? Have they got an attitude? Who do you think you are? You know, you can't tell me that. I'd want to know that they have the skill, but I want to know they have teachability. The third thing I want to know is that they're available. No point in empowering somebody who's not there. No point in giving power to somebody who doesn't turn up. There's a great little clip I was showing these guys yesterday about a person applying for a job, and the boss says, you need to be here at 8. And the person says, you know, actually, that's not a good time for me. I haven't even had my soy latte without foam or double shot yet. About 10:45 is the best time for me. No, we start at 8. And they just don't get that sometimes, do they? That actually there's a starting time and you're available from those times. It's not when you're available, it's our availability. Are they available to fit with what we're doing? I'd only empower a person who's totally available in that way and giving their heart to it. And the last one is relationship. I want to know there's chemistry. I want to know that we do click. I want to know that there is something that keeps us joined together. And I'd rate those on 1 to 10. You can do this with anybody in your church. Take a young person today, as you know them, put a scale of 1 to 10 on those items, and you'll know where you can, empower them, or how much you can. I've got to get moving because I've got 3 of these, so I better get going. I want to do the next one now. Is found in 1 Corinthians 3:6. This is in my opinion, a very misunderstood verse. It's a great caveat, isn't it? I could say I feel, but I don't like that myself anyway. It says this, I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the increase. Now, Here's the challenge. We read it like this. God, I planted, Apollos watered. God gave the increase. God! That's not the emphasis of the church, of the verse. That's not how Paul is saying it. And I can prove that by the next verse. He is saying, I planted, Apollos watered, but note, God gives the increase. Well, how do I know that? The next verse, verse 7 says, to reiterate the emphasis, so neither one of you who plants or waters or anything, but God who gives the increase. So he's balancing out his emphasis, isn't he? Because he's saying it's not about us, which is what he said in the first verse. He's saying it's about what God does. Now let me explain how that works as a leadership point. If your excuse for not growing is God gives the increase, you're in trouble. If your reasoning behind doing church is if we turn up on Sunday and we're faithful and we turn up and do our thing, God will increase it. Seen this 100 times doesn't work. I've seen and been in churches where they pray for the revival every weekend and they're down on the salad praying for revival and they've got shofars on the roof yelling at everybody and flags waving and they're not growing. And they're simply not growing because they think if we just turn up, God will increase it. Classical example of this is, of course, unless God builds the house. But you've left out the laborers work in vain. What about that bit? So here's a real challenge, I think, to us, is to understand what this means. Now, I'll explain it this way, which is the best I know. If I took a little seed of corn, packet of corn, okay, and I put the corn on there, and I might have said this to you before, but I can't remember. Have I? Okay. You put the corn on there. That corn has everything it needs to grow in that corn. That's the genius of God. The genius of God is that in that corn, something takes place in that corn, not sitting there when it's planted, when it's watered. Only then does the genius take place. See, it's a partnership, ladies and gentlemen, between God and us. The genius of the growth of the church is all God. He is the Savior and the head of the church. No question about that. But without us, can that seed flourish? Can that seed grow? If I take that seed corn and I bury it 6 foot in the ground and put a concrete slab on it, can it grow? The answer is no. It cannot grow. Even though the genius that's in the corn wants to, it can't because I haven't planted it right. We make too many excuses, in my opinion, about why churches are not flourishing and growing because we use verses like that which are not really what it's saying. The emphasis here is on Paul and Apollos, but the genius of growth is found in how Jesus works. Hello? The corn, that little packet, I've got them at home, packets of carrot seed and cabbages and stuff, and they sit in my drawer till the time for sowing. I know that the moment I put them in touch with warm soil, they grow. What is it in that tiny little seed? Has it got a brain or something? Has it got some sort of, what is it? Has it got a microchip in there? What is it in that thing that when I put it in the right place, it goes, ready to go? That's the part God does. That's the genius. What is it about people who come into church when we've invited them and we have a great praise time and something goes and they put their hand up or they receive Jesus? What is that? That's the genius of the work of the Spirit. But let me tell you this right now. They'll decide within 17 seconds if they want to stay here or go somewhere else by our culture and our experience and the way we behave. Oh yeah. So the genius of God is important to salvation, is the only way of salvation. But the ability to retain and disciple happens to land with us. Hello? You're very quiet now. All right, well, what I'll do is I'll just unpack that in four simple ideas. Here's the first one. Understand principles of soil and watering. I think what I've done on the text is put sowing and watering. I meant soil and watering. You don't need to understand the principle of sowing and reaping. We all know that one. But you do need to understand the principle of sowing and watering. That's digging into it a bit further. To understand the principles of sowing and watering is different to sowing and reaping, because that's a mental thing where I can give assent to the idea if you plant something, you reap something. But to understand what soil and water do is a different thing. So I know that for certain seeds, they have to have a certain soil and they have to have a certain amount of water. Isn't that right? Is it true? But that's a finely tuned skill to know that. It's a thing you learn in agriculture. If you just go out, my wife and I, gardening's a bit of a hobby for us. We'll take a house over and we'll start ripping the garden apart. And my wife, she's a designer, so she designs in the house. I'll go home. I'm telling you now, I'll go home and there'll be a picture moved, there'll be a chair moved, and I'll think, why has she done that? Because it just didn't look right. And it's very annoying, to be honest, to go home and everything's changed. And then it's changed back again, and then you have to bang a wall for she designs all the time, Scandinavian blood, so got all that. The trouble is now she's moved out to the garden. That really annoys me, because now the flowers have to be certain colours to fit, because it doesn't fit the eye. I don't give a rip as long as they grow and have a flower. Isn't that what's important? So you know what I did last year, and I've done it this year? I bought a whole, big clump of tulips of different colours, and I just scattered them all over the lawn and garden, and they're going to come up about February. And she's going, what are they doing there? I don't know. They just grew. But they look right. You have to move them. You can't move a tulip, love. You've got to leave it there just to annoy her, And this is how it works for us. We've been married 40 years this year. And when we were celebrating that with our two friends, somebody said, so how have you remained married to him for so long? She said, he travels a lot. And that was that. That was amazing, just like that. But you take this design out to the garden, and so we've got this stuff going on in the garden, and I just can't, you have to, they say green thumb. You've got to have a green thumb. But that's luck, actually. Actually, what it is understanding how soil and water work. There's some plants that don't like a lot of water and have to be put in the soil on the top, seed, and there's some seed that needs to go right down, and you've got to know that stuff. Now, the genius of the seed is it goes and it starts to grow. That's God's stuff. The part that gets it right is what I do. If I put that thing too far down in the ground, it will not grow. Doesn't matter how much of that thing wants to do it, it can't grow. So ladies and gentlemen, I suggest to you, it's really important that you understand your trade, that you understand the soil, the context you're working in, and how much water you need to give stuff, and how much energy you give to those things. It's not just a matter of sitting there on Sunday and waiting for God to bring people in that Calvinist model. Actually, we have to do some soiling, understand soil and water. Okay, I'll move on. Next one. Understand the different roles people play. Understand the different roles people. I think in leadership sometimes, I think it was Peter Senge, a leadership guy, who said organizations are a little bit like gardens or a park. There's different types of trees, and they do certain types of things, and they're meant to do that thing. And the beauty of the garden is that everybody's doing its thing. But when I go to churches, it seems to me that sometimes the pastor who's got a certain experience or leader, got a certain experience and background, they think everyone should be the same as them. I remember talking to a guy in a large church, large staff, and I watched the way he's leading the staff, and I said, there's something just strange about how you lead. You're not driving these people. You have this expectation, though, that they should all be like you. Now, he was a high-performing guy, highly gifted, needed very little sleep, 4 hours of sleep a night. Here's his challenge. When you've got 30 staff and you expect them all to be like him, mistake number one. They aren't all like him. He actually said to me, every one of these people should want my job. I said, mate, I've seen your job. I don't even want it. I've seen how much you sleep. I'm not interested in your job. Why would they want your job? Nobody wants your job the way you do things. You got it all wrong. You're not seeing people like a garden. And they have different roles and things to play. And some people can give you a couple of hours a week, but it changes everything in the garden. Some people can give you nothing, but a whole lot of money. It changes the things in the garden. Some people can give you a lot and changes things in the garden. And finding people's roles and where they fit is the art of being a great gardener. And the ability to understand the soil and the water so that God can then increase what comes into the house. Does that make sense? The next one is pray for laborers, not the harvest. Well, that's common sense because the scripture says it. But you know what we do? God said revival. That's not the prayer. The prayer is, Lord, bring somebody alongside of me who I can train and develop, or open my eyes to see the person I should invest in. Not give us revival. Those prayers cannot be answered by God. The harvest is already with you. He will never answer that prayer. but the prayer of who is the next young person. And I believe you've got to drop it down to 15 to 18-year-olds now. Got a guy I work with in a church, and he's just lost his executive pastor. He's about 35, maybe a bit younger actually. And I said, how are you replacing this guy? And he said, I have about 5 or 6 18-year-old guys I've been working with for some time, since I'm 15, and they're ready to fill the gap. And I like that idea of filling the gap. They're young, but he's worked with them, he's mentoring them, he's coaching them, just as you said. It's amazing what can come out of those spontaneous but clear mentoring sessions. Go back down and get into the life of those people and build them rather than say, where's the revival? Why hasn't God answered my prayer? Why aren't people getting saved? Build laborers. That's common sense, but it's one we need to work on, isn't it? The next one on this is find out where the process is not working. So obviously, if you're in your garden and the process isn't functioning, you need to ask yourself the question, why? I ask myself that question every spring. Got this grapevine thing. I had to buy it, she wanted one. Anyway, go no more. You can only grow tomatoes in Denmark in a glass house. You can't put them outside, they won't grow. It's not hot enough. So you have to put grapes in a glass house. We've got a glass house, we'll put this grapevine in. I cannot get a grape off that thing. It's got something to do with the soil or the water or maybe the pruning. Can't figure it out. So I've got to find out what process is not working there to fix it to grow. If I want fruit from that thing, it's my problem to figure out the process. I can't yell at the vine tree. I can't tell it off. I can say, what's wrong with you? Which is what we do with God. Why isn't my church growing? His mine's not. Because the genius of everything that I do is in people. And if you bring enough of them in, that genius will flourish. So it's my bother to manage the process rather than just put blame. With that vine, I have to figure out, I have a feeling in the process it's the pruning. I think I'm doing it wrong. But it could be the soil. Maybe too much water. Not sure. But it's a process. Hello? With your people, it's always about process. Here's the next verse. This one is a common one. You may know already about this one. But what we've covered so far is the dilemma of servant leadership and understanding that. The second is how God grows things. And the third one, interestingly, is this one, Matthew 18:20. For where 2 or 3 of you gather in my name, there I am with them. Or there I am in the midst is the King James word. There I am in the midst, or middle. There I am in the middle of them. Where 2 or 3. Now, have you heard this one? Well, Pastor, my small group is not growing. It's not functioning, but we had about 3 of us. But the Lord was really there. He was in the midst. And I go, so? That's what we expect. He's in the midst because he's living in us. If he's not in the midst, there's something wrong with us. But the context of that verse is the most misused verse in the world. Because every time somebody says to you things aren't working, they quote that one. Well, it wasn't very big, but the Lord was in the middle. And you often hear it, let's have a prayer meeting, and it doesn't matter how many turn up. Where 2 or 3 are gathered, there he is in the midst. And it's like the context of that verse, as you know, is conflict. Go back with me to verse 15 to 17. Now, this is verse 18. So the context is 16 and 17, 15, 16, 17. And this is what it says. Jesus says, when you have an issue with somebody in your world, go face to face. Second, take a witness if they won't respond to that. Thirdly, take it to the leadership. Okay, so that's how you do it. That's his model of. Then he says, whatever you choose to do in that scenario, wherever 2 or 3 of you agree on that answer in the conflict, I am there confirming that answer. That's what he's saying. So he's saying in the midst of conflict and the worst time possible when people are offended and upset, if you choose to do this right, I will be in the middle of that situation helping you resolve the conflict. Can I help you here? This is a conflict resolution verse, not an excuse verse for why stuff's not happening. It's all about conflict. So let's line them up. Servant leadership model, if you don't get it right, you're doing the wrong things, I think. If you put all the growth on God, then you're not going to grow anything. Third, the most common one in church life is conflict, and we misuse the verse. So let's explain this one in the short time I've got. And you've given me lots of time, by the way. It's not that short. Here's the first one. The 4 things I'd say. Good conflict resolution skills is more biblical than no conflict. Let that one marinate. Good conflict resolution skills is more biblical than no conflict. Let me help you here. If you have a church that's never had a conflict, somebody in the relationship is not needed to be there. Because that's... Now, our goal, what is it our goal? Our goal is to have no conflicts. So here's what we do when a conflict comes. We bury our head in the sand because we don't believe in conflicts. They're wrong. Bury your head in the sand. And that's a typical leadership response. In most small church pastor mindsets, bury your head in the sand. Go down like the ostrich. I don't want to know because we don't believe in conflicts. They're evil, they're wrong, they come from the devil. Oh. What this verse says by Jesus is actually, if you have proper resolution skills in effect and you behave right to those, then you can deal with anything that comes along. Church in Sweden that I work with has a department. It's about 1,800, this church has a department of conflict resolution. And all they do, these people are trained to deal with the conflicts in the church. Pastor doesn't do it. It's like having a counseling department or a pastoral care department. So when there's a conflict between a marriage or a relationship on team, they use these geniusly trained people to help sit in the middle of that and solve the conflict. Now, when you go to that church, the presence of God is very real because they're doing the Jesus model. They're working towards conflict resolution than having no conflict whatsoever, which means you're probably superintending yourself higher than you ought to be because you're shutting down every discussion because you don't want to have those discussions because they lead to conflict. But actually, if you learn to resolve them better, you'll have better conversations. Does that make sense? Why do some churches never have creative conversations? Why do they not release creativity on the floor of the church and let everybody get involved in the detail of creativity? Oh, that's a discussion. Could be conflict, could be challenge. People misunderstand each other. So shut the conversation down, just do what you're told. That's not healthy church. But conflict resolution skills is healthy church. All right? Not saying much on that one. Here's the second one. God's presence can be in the conflicts. How many of you have noticed? This is really interesting. I don't know if this is an opportunity is the right word, but I get to work with churches that are in conflict a lot. Some of the conflicts I could write books on. They're unbelievable conflicts. What I've noticed about these conflicts is that it seems to me if it's handled properly and they use good conflict, it's amazing what God does in that mechanism. It's amazing how the church grows, how they supplement what they were lost, how things become alive. Often I think it's because of gap creation too, actually. When you have a whole lot of leadership walk out, there's a big gap and people rise up. But I've watched and I've always looked for that in conflicts. Where's God in this thing? Not the source, but where is he working? Where's traction in this thing? Because I'll tell you why, any church, doesn't matter how big it is, has conflicts. But I want to know, and you want to know, where's God in this at this moment? All things work together for good to them who love God. The third one is always use the Jesus pattern. Jesus only used the word church twice. Matthew 16, Matthew 18. Matthew 16, what we call the macro view of church life. Macro, big view. And the gates of hell will not prevail against the church. Throws out the word, ecclesia, never heard before, grabbed by the disciples later on. Paul took it to himself and it became their word. Before that it meant nothing. But Jesus in a moment said it. He never pastored one, never led one, but he created the word. Matthew 18, just a few moments later, he says, micro view. Here's the problem of the church. When you get together, you're going to fight. The macro view, nothing will stop the church. Micro view, you're always going to have arguments. Here's how you fix it. First culture you want to have is everything's face-to-face, not Facebook. How many churches have you seen? I was in Australia just in May, actually. No, September, working with a church there. They had 8 campuses spread out, country Victoria, so they're spread out. Sorry, country New South Wales, so they're spread out. Like every church is 2 hours away from each other, at least by a helicopter, miles apart. So they're dealing with fractured cultures and different cultures. And he said, we've just lost a campus. And I said, what happened? And he said, we don't know. We read it on Facebook. How can you justify in your world that Facebook is the correct biblical way Jesus taught? Well, because it's got the word face in it. So if it's got face in it, then I can do it on Facebook. Those people, forget what they left for, were unbiblical from the moment they put it on Facebook. What they should have done was gone and seen the pastor and had an eye to eye. But here's the problem. They don't believe in conflict, so they didn't do it. Easy to cut it on Facebook and then deal with it. Because we have to believe and understand there's power in conflict. But if you manage it right, true? You're looking at me very strange. The last one is, I think, install processes quickly. You need to have processes for conflicts, and you need to have ways that you manage conflict and how you work with it. Never be afraid of conflict, because often God is in the midst of that, working through it. And so I think it's our job to make sure we have processes. Like that Swedish church, you mightn't be able to have a conflict resolution team, but you can say conflict resolution skills, the next training thing we do for our small group leaders is how to resolve conflicts. Maybe that's where you start. But you teach people that conflict happens, and here's the process we have to fix up the conflict. These are the three big areas of church, I think, aren't they? Servant leadership, how God grows things, and conflicts. And often what's happened is the Bible is addressing them, but we misunderstand how the text is working. And sometimes that screws our feet to the floor in the wrong place. So we're stymied by our own biblical understanding. What I hope today is that maybe you've had just a little brain moment. Maybe a little tweak here and, okay, like that, that's all. Because most of you are high-performance people. You know what you're doing. You know what you're doing well. And all you need is a tweak. Often that tweak is enough to just put a little bit more speed on what you're doing. You don't need transformation. You need just a little moment where you go, I never thought about that. If I did that, it could change everything. That's been my hope today, that there's just tweaks. They go, I could do that one. I could do that one. And it makes you a better leader rather than let's start from the scratch. We don't need to do that. But we need to tweak things all the time. Does that make sense? In a moment, I'll pray for you guys. It's time for lunch. But I have some resources with me. And Stuart has very kindly given me, there was actually 4 of these, Irene. Have you stolen one? Have you put it in your bag? Oh, somebody's nicked one already. Look, doesn't take long. They're in such high demand, these. All right, I got 2 books now. I had this one last time on tithing. This is the book that we wrote for a couple of churches that use this to, if you didn't read the Old Testament but only the New Testament, would you tithe? The idea being helping new Christians and people in the faith who have been a Christian a while understand the economic engine of God. Every kingdom has an economic drive. I firmly believe in tithing, and by the way, the great grace man Joseph Prince does too, endorses it, preaches it, and has a great message on it. Just you never hear it, so everyone just thinks he doesn't believe in it because he's grace. Tithing was the law, but actually tithing is very clear in the New Testament. For example, if you wore the badge, the bracelet, what will Jesus do? WWJD. Well, the first thing I say to people, you got one of those? Yeah, Jesus tithed, so you must be tithing, right? And they go, oh no, I don't do that. But what will Jesus do? He tithed. So why are you not tithing? Well, I do only some things I like about what Jesus did. That's the way it works. So what I've done is written this, and I'm hoping some of you bought it, and I want to get this into your leaders and into your churches. So we have a price for you on this. I've got about 30 of them there. If you want to take some bulk and sell them or use them for leadership, or some of your churches. Now, your church has already used this. Howard, where's Howard? Up the back there. You guys have done, and we've done videos on this and put it through the church, and as I understand it, it's helped you guys a lot with that. This one is called, Does God Allow Suffering, based on 20 years of living in Denmark? And this is a question that most people in the world are asking. Why does bad things happen to good people? And I wrote this a while ago, but all the books I read on this thing, they were very small print, big words, long words, and crammed pages. So I wrote one that's got lots of space on the pages, small words that everybody can understand, and big print so that, it fills out the pages really well, makes it look thick book. So this is for anybody really, but my view is if leaders don't answer that basic one, well, I think we mess with people's heads a bit, because the first probably discipleship question you'll bump into is, well, why do bad things happen to people? Or within 3 months something bad happens in their life and they want to know how to fix it. What's God doing? I've just become a Christian and all this happened. So we need good answers, and I hope there is some good ones in here. I think there are. The first one I deal with is what's called structural sin, which is the idea that in myself as a Christian, Jesus has worked something in my life, but that doesn't help me with the structure of sin out there. There's a whole structure of sin out there. The world is in a structure of sin. So there's two natures of sin. The one that works within me, but the one that I walk out there and I fall over in the ice. That's the structure of sin. Does that make sense? Well, if it doesn't, get the book. It'll help you. And there's other things in there. We talk about some biblical ideas. And I've got a lot of these, so you can buy these in bulk too. And I'll give you a price on that in a moment. And you can sell them in your bookshop or maybe, have you got this one? No, I'll give that to you. And it's only £10. So if you want some signed copies, I'll sign them for you so that you have a signed copy of a rare book. I don't know how many of these I'll sell. And later on you can, but Christmas is nearly here. This is good, isn't it? Because you can read it really carefully and just not bend the pages and then wrap it up and give it to somebody for Christmas. Could you get it any better? It's amazing. So you double money there. These are normally £8. If you bought 10, 5 of each, you can get them for £4 each. So you can sell them for £8 in the bookshop or give them away to people in the church that might need to have these. We have a card machine down there that you can use if you wish. So there's those 2 books there. Now, quickly, I know, I can feel it, Stuart. You want me to get off. We have these resources up here. I've had an hour with you, but this is what we've done. We've got the white one that says this. This is the back of my head right now, you're seeing there. No, that's the book. I just did that. That one. It's the resources one, and it's coming right. It's please come, because I can't tell you everything. It's the one, the PowerPoint which says resources, and it's got a whole list. We played it together. I looked at it with you guys. It's not there. Oh, okay. All right. Not there. It was there. Trust me. Okay. This white one, I have the list of what's on it up the back. I had it on there. There's 20 sessions on these ones done in a studio on leadership. This one is master's degree level conflict resolution and change management stuff. Organizational change and coaching and mentoring at master's level. 20 lessons on there. The black one has a whole lot of stuff that's more church, like theology. There's 350 pages of notes on this one. And this one has messages about overcoming pain levels, because the church is only as good as your next pain level. You're only as good as your next pain level. Stuff like this. So they're all listed down there. Now there's 20 hours on each one, all done on a studio. And hopefully those things you'd play over and over again to help you in your leadership. You can just put this in your computer, suck all the stuff off, empty it, and then give it to somebody as a Christmas present, because these are quite expensive, aren't they? So you say, here's a USB thing for you. I mean, you could give that to a 7-year-old today and they know what to do with it. So these are 25 each. So that's 100 if you bought all 4. 75 if you buy all 4, and 2 free books as well. Now that's pretty cheap. Because when I take your £75 back to Denmark, it's worth nothing, trust me. This is so cheap in pounds, I'm thinking of buying them myself and selling them back to the Danish people. Because the pound it's the Brexit thing. And so £75 for the 2 books and the USBs. If you buy 10 of these, 5 of each, you get them for £4 each. Or you can just buy the 2 books. So that's available to you. I know you want to have lunch, but I will be down there to meet you and to talk you through these, and I hope help you with more information. But let me pray for you now. Do you want me to say grace as well? That saves a bit of time, doesn't it? You don't have to go hunting for somebody who can say grace. And we all know that most people don't really want to say grace. Have you noticed that at the table? Well, we're going to say grace. He's bound to ask me. And then you have to and when you say grace, you either have to say this really bland, short one, just get it over with, or this really long one that sounds very theological. And choosing is very hard, isn't it? Which one will I do? Will I do shall I pay for all the missionaries in China and talk about the Trinity? Or shall I just say, thank you, Lord, for this food I'm in, dig in, don't wait, something like that. Anyway, that's just a thought. So, let me pray for you guys. Father, I thank you for all these leaders, these wonderful people here today who have a wonderful responsibility to lead your house wherever they are. And I hope today that something landed in their mind and their spirit that can help them move forward. And Lord, we thank you today that we can gather around food together and have a meal together. So we just bless all of that too right now. And thank you for the people who have prepared it. And we look forward to great discussion and great time together as we relationally explore where each other's coming from and what we're doing. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you.